Fear. You haven't felt fear until you've listened to me. A mess of flesh and bone. Before I moved to Seattle, I worked at a veterinarian's hospital, the only one in this huge, empty countryside down near Oregon. We were mostly surrounded by wheat farms, but there were a couple of ranches nearby, and everyone with a pet liked to make sure it stayed healthy. It was quiet, respected work, and a nice place to grow old. That all started to slip away when the sheriff showed up one morning with some evidence he wanted me to look at. He seemed frustrated by the whole thing, so I asked him what was going on. As it turned out, something had mauled one of the rancher's sheep the night before, and while everyone on the scene thought it was clearly a wild animal attack, the rancher believed it was something else. I took a look at the remains and agreed with the sheriff's theory. The wounds, the teeth marks on the bones, it all pointed towards a wolf being responsible. A wolf, you say? The sheriff asked me. Yes, sir. You need an expert to narrow it down from there, but that's not my specialty. He rolled his eyes. Shit. I say wolf and everyone's gonna put on a goddamn tinfoil hat. Right. It had been a full moon the night before, so I understood what he meant. Well, if it helps, I could just vaguely say a wild animal of some kind was responsible. Don't bother, the sheriff said, shaking his head. It'll get out of hand either way. Just brace for it when it comes. And it did come, with the next full moon. I'll admit, I was as anxious as anyone when the next full moon came. I locked my doors, bunkered down, and made sure my shotgun was ready in case I had to defend myself. Luckily, nothing happened to me. I wish I could say the same for everyone else. With dawn came the news that things had gotten worse. There were 2 attacks overnight. One on the same ranch as before, and another on a farm a few miles away. The livestock weren't attacked at the ranch, but the family was massacred. Everyone in the house had been torn apart. Later, the sheriff would tell me over drinks that the rancher's young daughter was almost completely devoured in her room. God, I said, I can't imagine finding a mess of flesh and bone in a child's bedroom. No, the sheriff said, sitting up. There weren't any bones. It was just... It's a fucking sleeper cell. He left in a hurry, with no further explanation, and never came back. The sheriff never shared his theory before skipping town, but he didn't have to. A friend at the hospital told me that they treated one of the victims of the farm attack, a boy who had been bitten by the wolf. On the night of the 3rd full moon, his farmhouse was a bloodbath. The boy was gone, having left only his skin behind. Ghost Town. If you've ever passed through the town of Ashwood, Oregon, chances are you haven't noticed. Maybe you stopped by and bought a snack at our general store, or used their restroom before moving on to Salem or Eugene. Maybe you spent the night at my family's motel. You wouldn't remember it, though. It's a highway town, a rest stop. Nothing special. We notice you, but you don't notice us. Some days, everyone who passes by keeps going, and no one stops. It's so common that it's not even worth mentioning. Happens all the time. But when last Wednesday came and no one even passed by, we sure as hell noticed. My father and a few others drove down the highway, checking to see if the road had been closed. Rumors swirled. Some thought we'd just been caught between road work on both sides. Others assumed that we'd been quarantined. None of our phones worked, and the radios were all static. So you can imagine that those were the more tame theories. When one of the patrollers got back that night, he said that he'd gone as far as Millersburg. Between here and there, every other highway town seemed normal, but Millersburg was abandoned. Ran into someone who lives near Freeway Lakes on the way back, he told us. He'd gone all the way to Salem. Not a soul in sight. My dad had gone south, planning to go as far as Eugene. He never came back. And just like that, 2 of Oregon's biggest cities were ghost towns. Over 300,000 people were unaccounted for, my dad included. The patrols down the highway continued, and every day it sounded worse. More highway towns had just joined the ranks of the abandoned, all left empty by something. One patroller said that the ranch he'd stopped by was completely abandoned, animals included. Other patrollers hadn't seen any wildlife along the roads either. Alien abductions, or invasion, became the prevailing theory. This weekend, a couple more patrollers didn't come back. No one's checking the roads anymore. Yesterday morning, we woke up to find the south side of town abandoned. No signs of struggle were found. They were just gone. My sisters decided to take their chances and hit the road. They went north, leaving me behind when I admitted that I was afraid of leaving. They didn't come back. This morning, I woke up to find everyone else gone. My neighbors, their pets, everyone. The sun's setting. Maybe it's setting on me tonight. Maybe everything. I've stopped looking out the window. There's no one coming. But I stay behind my desk in the motel lobby in case someone does show up. And I ask myself why. Why am I still a motel clerk if there is no one to check in? Am I a son anymore if my dad is gone for good? Am I still a brother if my sisters never come back? Who am I if I'm no one to anyone? And for how much longer? And for my next trick. Is this your card? The magician asked, holding the volunteer's signed Ace of Hearts. Yes, the man yelled in surprise. Of course it is, the magician joked. And in your shock, you might be wondering how that card was removed from your shirt pocket. Would you do me a favor and see what has now taken its place? Sure. The man unbuttoned his pocket and pulled out cash. It's a $100 bill. Yes, sir. And now it's yours. That's for being such a fantastic assistant. With that, the magician gestured back to the man's seat. The crowd clapped, the man gleefully holding his reward in the air for his friends to see. The magician allowed the applause to die out before continuing. He smiled mischievously. With that being said, I ask for one more volunteer. Hands shot up in the air immediately, including mine. Don't expect to get picked, Brian grumbled. The other guy's probably just a plant. I glared at him briefly, annoyed, before looking back. The magician was no longer smiling, instead staring daggers at my friend. Somehow, from the front of the room, he seemed to have heard what Brian said. Sir, he called out to Brian, I believe you would be the perfect assistant. Please come to the stage. The audience began to clap, and after rolling his eyes at me, Brian relented. As my friend reached the stage, the smile slowly returned to the magician's face. Well then, let us speak of skepticism. This man, as you may have overheard, does not believe in magic. The magician placed a hand on Brian's shoulder, and the crowd began to boo. I joined in. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to have such doubts about my abilities. Most magicians are simply flamboyant conmen, using sleight of hand and rigged variables to present something that mystifies believers and challenges non-believers' abilities to see past the ruse. I, however, am no conman. The magician took his large hat and held it towards the audience, spinning it around. As you can see, this is a normal hat. No rigged variables, of course, and certainly no rabbit. Sir, what is your name? Brian. Take this hat for me, Brian. Look closely at it and make sure it seemed completely normal. No gears, no wires, nothing out of the ordinary. Brian looked over the hat, turning it in his hands. Seems normal to me. Hold that hat out, sir, with the opening pointed towards me. Brian did as instructed. Now, my previous trick was the switching of a card and $100 bill from across the stage, the magician said, holding up the signed playing card. And for my next trick, I will exchange this card for something almost as valuable as money. The magician reached into the hat with the hand holding the card. As he pulled his hand out, Brian collapsed. The magician held his hand up. The card had been replaced by Brian's still beating heart. Anything could be inside. I've always hated those storage unit auction TV shows. As someone who actually buys the contents of storage units so I can sell them at my thrift store, I can tell you with absolute certainty that those shows are complete bullshit. All those shows have done is convince idiots with too much money to flood the market. They jack up their prices, lowering my potential profits, and they feel ripped off when they realize that they bought $20 worth of junk for 10 times as much. They have no idea what it's really like to buy these lots as a career. It's not a war. We're not hunters, and we're certainly not searching for some buried treasure. It's a business. Besides, we don't just find valuable items that can be resold. We find mysteries within those thin metal walls, stories that were meant to remain locked away from the outside world. You buy what's inside, and that becomes your responsibility. Those mysteries become yours to solve, and those stories become yours to tell. I can't sell these things, but perhaps I can make use of them. Here's a good one that might entertain you, or at least keep you away from my auctions. This was early into my second year running the store with my partner. We were looking into a unit from the outside and something caught my eye. This dull little metal lockbox half covered by a blanket, surrounded by clothes and trash bags. No one else saw it, and I got the lot for $20. I made a beeline for the box as soon as I paid for the lot, climbing over bags and clothes until I had it in my hands. I shook it, and it seemed full of small things. It didn't sound like coins, but I allowed myself to imagine that it did. Anything could be inside, right? The box was locked and had no key, so I decided to pry it open at the store. In the meantime, we had a lot of full-load clothes and blankets to move. Since nothing was fragile, we just threw it all into our van and brought it back to the store. We'd wash and dry it all before putting it on the rack, of course, but my partner wanted to sort it all out first. While he was busy with that, I started prying the lockbox open with a flathead screwdriver. When my partner walked over to explain that he thought something was off about the clothes, the strange amount of variety in size and fit, I got the box open. I stared silently at the contents while he wondered aloud where all the different clothes came from. Maybe it's all from another thrift store, he guessed. Or a lot of other people, I replied. Look at this. I turned the box around, allowing my partner to see what was inside. The box was filled to the brim with human teeth. The Lady of the Lagoon. Small towns always have fascinating urban legends, mysteries, tragedies, even impossible stories. Sometimes they're even true. I learned that when I was a kid. My family always spent our summer vacations at Cannon Bay, a small port town my mama grew up in. My grandpa still lives up there, enjoying his retirement and sharing the many stories he's collected over the years. He was the first person to tell me about the Lady of the Lagoon. No, not the Arthurian legend. As he once told me, the Lady of the Lagoon is a beautiful woman who appears in the shallow waters of the lagoon just south of town, beckoning anyone who dares to visit her domain alone. A few years later, when I was an annoying, rebellious teenager, I decided to finally visit the lagoon. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, I snuck out and made my way to the lagoon. I found a boat loosely tied to the dock, so I pulled the knot apart and hopped in. The boat had one oar and no motor, so I slowly paddled to the center of the lagoon. When I got to the center of the lagoon, I looked down to see if someone was waiting for me. Of course, nothing was there. Realizing that I was disappointed to learn that the lady wasn't real, I started to paddle back to the dock. Wait! Come back! A voice called out from behind me. I turned to see that someone was floating just below the surface of the water. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell that she was a young woman with long blonde hair. Still underwater, she began to swim towards me. Something in the back of my mind told me to run. I ignored it, more curious than cautious. When she reached the boat, I leaned away, flinching involuntarily. As soon as she got to the far end of the boat, the lady reached up and grabbed at me. In the rush of the moment, I could see that she had a clawed, webbed hand, and her skin was covered in scales. When her hand returned to the water, it was a woman's hand again. I grabbed for the oar daring to take my eyes off of the lady for a moment, and she was gone when I looked back. I held the oar up, ready to use it as a weapon, but the lady had disappeared. I paddled to the dock as quickly as I could. As I made my way back, I could feel someone staring at me, but didn't allow myself to look back. I only looked back after I got on dry land, and no one was there. I ran back to my grandpa's place and snuck back inside. I never told him or my mother what I'd seen. I learned 2 important lessons about urban legends that night. Sometimes they're true, and sometimes they're a warning. Hey everybody, it's Anonimus here. I'll be honest with you, I've been quite lazy, and I've supposed to have been uploading a lot more content by now, especially because it's Halloween, which is my favorite holiday. I love October as well. It's my favorite month of the year. I love when fall comes. I kind of felt bad, and I was like, I just wanted to throw something together really fast. I still hope that I did these stories justice. I wonder how many people actually laughed at my Lady in the Lake Lagoon voice. Or Lady in the, what did I just say? Lady in the Lake Lagoon, or the Lady in the Lagoon, or whatever. I don't even know what I'm saying. Point is, I mean it this time. I'm really gonna start uploading more content. Yesterday I had part 2 of The Missing Five by FoggyGlassEye, who also did all of these stories. He wrote these stories, I should say. I narrated them. And the 3rd and final part is going to be released soon. I'm afraid to put a date on it because then, knowing me, I'll procrastinate and it won't actually happen. But soon, very soon, much sooner than the wait between parts 1 and 2. I hope you guys are having a great October. I hope you guys have been enjoying my content so far. For those of you who have heard it, I'm very grateful. Please like, share, and even subscribe. So yeah, this is Anonymous here. And man, I might even change that name, man. It's hard for me to say. If I'm having a hard time saying my own YouTube name, I should probably change it. But that's later down the road. Let me first focus on getting some more content out there for you guys. And yeah, happy Halloween. Stay spooky, my friends.